Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Saffron. I am a postdoctoral research fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Studies. I am also a research fellow with the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University. Today, I'll be telling you about a model I've developed of sexual pleasure and really all pleasures, I believe, and ecstatic states via mechanisms of rhythmic entrainment. And I will also be discussing their potential implications for human connection and bonding. I thought of these ideas came to me a number of years ago, but I first published on them in 2016 in an article in Socioaffective Neuroscience and Psychology, which is open access and free to read online for anyone who's interested. The inspiration came when I was reading about actually epilepsy. And I learned about, I was reading about these epilepsies that would be triggered by rhythmic stimuli. So some people are vulnerable to flashing lights like a strobe light, and that could trigger seizures for them. Then I also read about an interesting case where someone would get spontaneous orgasms from brushing their teeth with an electric toothbrush. And then I was also reading about epilepsies where the auras, the feeling leading up and accompanying the seizures would be associated with these ecstatic or mystical states. Apparently, Dostoevsky experienced these, described these in his book, The Idiot. That's Saint Teresa may have had something similar. And interestingly, also my father, he was a temporal lobe epileptic who would have music-related ecstatic states and frequent seizures. So from all of this, I started to wonder, well, could there be a common thread? Something about rhythms which are gateways to intense experience and pleasure. And so then I started to think that, yes, and I was focused mostly on the case of sexuality and wondering with respect to orgasm, what is it about rhythms that help people to experience sexual pleasure and possibly orgasm? And so I started thinking of an evolutionary account of this, and I believe there's a story here that's hundreds of millions of years old, maybe even more, at least hundreds of millions. But the basic idea is that there's a thread going through mating song, mating dances, and the mating act itself, where you're having this gating of whether or not things will proceed based on the abilities of animals to exhibit strong or precise rhythms, and that this may be an honest indicator of organismic fitness. And so this would be a good thing for gating the mating act. So let's see. Darwin had somewhat similar ideas, and let's see it in action. So as I was saying, I believe this is a very old story of the fundamental nature of rhythms and mating. But why? Well, rhythms are even more fundamental, if that's possible, than mating, in that nervous systems are inherently rhythmic. They have to be. Nervous systems, neurons are noisy, that they fire kind of oftentimes semi-randomly. In order to bring them together, especially if they're large, they have to learn to communicate in time together so that they can have coherent communication, so that activity of neurons can sum rather than decay. And so the syntax of the brain of nervous systems, it's inherently rhythmic. And so then the idea being that if you can display these rhythms, this is showing that you have a well-tuned nervous system and you're potentially a well-tuned organism and evolutionarily worthy of making it to the next generation. But with those fish, what exactly was going on there? What kind of mechanism is happening? So what I suggested is that what's happening there is describable in terms of a principle of entrainment. And so entrainment maybe was first published on by Christian Huygens, describing this odd kind of sympathy where when clocks were placed on a wall, they were found that over time they would just spontaneously come into sync. So somehow by exchanging vibrations through a wall, he noticed the clocks would spontaneously synchronize. And I can show you a little bit of that right here. You see these metronomes, they're decoupled. They're sharing that beam. Maybe eventually they'd sync, but maybe not. But once you let them really start to couple, really start to exchange energy, then they come into sync with each other. And so this is a nearly ubiquitous principle in nature, the ability of order to emerge via this ability of dynamical systems to synchronize with each other. And so in the sexual domain, the idea is that people, as they're coupling, they're mechanically coming into synchrony, and that this is allowing nervous systems to become synchronized by virtue of the nervous systems coupling with the rhythmic activity. I'll explain a little bit more what I mean by this. But one metaphor you can think of is pushing on a swing. That's another way of thinking of entrainment. So in the model I developed, you would start with a less rhythmic or arrhythmic interaction, not particularly pleasurable or sensual. And then it acquires some sort of rhythmic nature. So now these rhythms, by pushing at the swing of your nervous system, would then cause your ongoing neural oscillations to be brought into alignment with these rhythms. And so now your brain is going more at that frequency. However, there's an interesting twist here, and that it's been observed that you're better able to attend to stimuli when they come in phase with your ongoing oscillations. So it seems that the default refresh rate of your consciousness is happening at alpha frequencies about 8 to 12 times a second, or at least the ability of your consciousness to sample from the environment. And so if I were to flash like a face, and it came at this up state, at this period of synchrony, and if it comes at the alpha up state, you'll be more likely to detect it or make some sort of discrimination based on this. So intention is enhanced by when external stimuli or any stimuli are in a phasic alignment with your ongoing oscillations. But then there's another interesting twist, and that entrainment effects have been shown to be more powerful with greater attention. The more you attend to something, the more it can entrain you. And so this then could, I suggest, create a kind of positive feedback loop between your nervous system being entrained, and then you being better able by rhythms, and then you being better able to attend to things at those rhythms. And with this positive feedback loop, if it goes on long enough, it will crowd out other more arrhythmic stimuli and allow you to have intense focus on whatever that rhythm is. And if that rhythm is pleasurable, you'll have intense focus and consciousness for those rhythmic stimuli, that rhythmic experience. And if you let this go on long enough and strongly enough, potentially you can surpass critical thresholds. And this could cause a few things, but one, it could crowd out things like self-monitoring, self-processes. So it could be associated with things like flow states, losing yourself in an experience, which itself would be pleasurable. But at the extreme, this could allow your brain to come in this highly synchronized state. If you get in this period, in this regime, you can have a high degree of communication across the brain, and that this could cause orgasm as a kind of quasi-epileptiform type process akin to a seizure. Turns out I'm not the first person to suggest this. Actually, Barry Komisarek, he published on this first around 2011. And so when I read that, I was like, okay, maybe this works. So that's the basic model. You have this progression going of engagement with rhythmic stimuli, which entrain you, which lets you attend to them more deeply, which lets them entrain you more, and so on. And that this creates highly intense, focused experience, intense pleasure. And if you push this hard enough, it can bring the whole brain into a highly synchronized regime that can cause these flare-ups of activity, which some of them would be experienced as climax or orgasm. But this general story, I believe this isn't the case only for sexuality. I think this might be the case for all intense pleasures. I'm actually, in some ways, I'm not aware actually of a pleasure that isn't fundamentally rhythmic in its character. Eating, running, for some people, dancing, like the things people seek out the most, they tend to have this rhythmic quality: music, dance, and sex. And so yeah, the model is one of, you become highly synchronized, and then communication can flow well, and then something happens and you ring the bell, and this quasi-epileptiform process would be orgasm or climax. And they're saying, Barry, I think 2011 suggested this, Komisarek and Whipple. And so, but the pleasure, though, it's not just at the orgasm; it's throughout. And in this biased competition where rhythms can win out against less rhythmic thing and crowd out yourself, this would be, I think, a large part of what we should take into account to describe the phenomenology of sexual experience and maybe most intense pleasures. Crowding out of things that are less rhythmic, you associate with something like a flow state, this optimal engagement where just things are moving smoothly. You're completely engaged, and that itself would be pleasurable. There might be an additional element in that thing about cells is they sometimes suffer. They get into all sorts of problems. The world is bigger than cells. And if you crowd out this ability to reflect on yourself as this temporally extended thing that can get into trouble and is limited in all these ways, that itself could be a big part of the pleasure, losing yourself in the experience. That seems to be a lot of what people are seeking in various peak states, both losing and finding themselves. So more recently, I've been trying to extend this model to an interpersonal context. So at first, I wasn't sure it even worked, and so I was just saying, like, could the mechanism even work? So, like, how do I explain an individual being entrained with a rhythm? But the interesting thing is that if this rhythm is being created or co-created with two people, well, then they can come into sync with each other and they can become highly entrained together. And I think this might have important consequences. So the idea here would be that in this state of rhythmic engagement where this self-monitoring, this, right on time, your ability to metacognitively reflect on yourself, to extend yourself through time and think of all these things that aren't what's happening in the moment, when those get crowded out, basically your egoic selfhood, you go from the Jamesian me to an I, to just this experience. And under these conditions, someone else might be doing this too. And so you're both in this state of relaxed self boundaries, and you are synchronized mechanically and potentially neurally. And so if you're synchronized neurally, if your brain rhythms, probably definitely delta, maybe theta, and maybe as much as alpha, 8 to 12 times a second, unclear, but at least theta. So 3 to 7 times a second, sampling information from the environment. Well, if you're both generating actions and sampling at the same time, you have this very high bandwidth channel of communication between you. Just the way that neurons, by coming into alignment, communicate more, you, by being in alignment with someone else, that's a higher bandwidth channel for communication. And so this could create better conditions for shared emotional contagion. And so here are two people experiencing intense pleasure, with their self-monitoring reduced, and a high bandwidth channel of communication between them where they're likely sharing emotional states, little fluctuations of emotion, one person shared by the other and vice versa, and these very tight feedback loops. This, I think this might be a good amount of why does the shared rhythms facilitate bonding, sexual and otherwise. Um, and if we throw on top of this experience orgasm and getting the brain's pharmacopoeia, you release that, and so you have enhanced metaplasticity. That'd be another means of bonding. So not only were you sharing in this kind of peak experience together, but now you've upped the gain on the things that would bake that into your neural circuits. I have doing okay on time, so I can go a little more speculative here. There's this experiment called the rubber hand illusion. Sometimes it's done with like a full body swap. But basically, if you take someone's hand and you hide it under a table, and then you put a fake hand above the table, and you stroke both the rubber hand and your concealed hand in synchrony, there's this interesting effect that happens where you start to feel that this rubber hand is part of your own body. And you can do this with your full body. You can this can also happen with full embodiment. But it seems that our body maps are surprisingly plastic. And this is part of, for instance, what allows them to be adaptive and grow and recover. And it also allows us to do things like use tools. It's been shown that tool use will, when you become good with it, like the master swordswoman, the sword will become part of her hand, part of her arm. It will be incorporated into her body schema. And so very speculatively, the idea is that when people are sharing rhythms, they might actually potentially generate a kind of sense of co-embodiment. And so even their very minimal embodied selfhood could start to be somewhat porous. And this, again, might not even be just sex. It could be other shared rhythms and mother-infant bonding, people doing war chants together, all sorts of things. But the idea is that part of bonding could be a sense of co-selfhood and a sense of co-embodiment. So let's see. This might do it more justice than I can. We're gonna watch the whole thing together. We had to watch the whole thing together because I think that's still maybe the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and maybe the most important. I'm increasingly wondering, and I'm not the only one. Robin Dunbar has some interesting work in this direction regarding like why do we sing and why do we dance together. But I'm thinking that this is the secret of our success as a species. This is the fundamental part of what makes us human. our ability to share rhythms together, and through sharing rhythms deeply, being able to have a kind of flexible sense of identification, a flexible capacity for bonding and sharing emotions. This is what let us cooperate across scales. This is what lets the child learn from its parents. This is what lets um, individuals learn from each other and allowing uh, uniquely human abilities for social learning and cumulative cultural evolution. I think it might all come down to potentially uniquely human capacities for shared rhythms. Uh, there's two interesting things that you wouldn't expect that humans are actually uniquely good at. We're very good at long distance running. Like I think we're the best. Um, and we're also the best at having flexible and precise rhythms. And if you look at some of the genes associated with the evolution of humans, they're actually heavily involved in the cerebellum, which is exceedingly important for being able to do flexible and precise timing. So this story of how it is we have the deepest pleasures, I think it's the source of our deepest meanings on every level. And I think it's part of what makes us who we are and who we could be. So thank you for your time and attention. Um, Please contact me if you have any questions. Take care.